lady in my parish always says, Father Steve, you start Mass early. I said, no, you're late. You're late every Sunday. I'm glad you're here, but you're late. And so I've always tried to respect people's time. And so we want to make sure our program indeed ends at 3:30 so you can move on to the next part of your agenda. My mother, who worked from home, would always ask me when I came home from school, what did you learn today in school? I was blessed to have supportive parents and a family who cared about me. And I always had to give something that I learned that day. And if my mom was here and she's not on this earth, I would say to her, I learned something today in school from this one slide. It says this: love is seeing someone as they deserve to be seen, as they really are, not through a lens of behaviors we sometimes needed to display. That touched my heart today. It touched my heart in my capacity as an educator and someone who tries to lift up our young people. At this point, I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce himself and give 2 minutes, 2-minute reflection on what you heard today in Dr. Ginsburg's keynote address. And then we'll take questions from the community. What it is to introduce our panelists: Rebecca Gilligan-Bryan, who is a Wellness Center Director for Urban Promise. Welcome, Rebecca. Dan Roden, who is Executive Director of Hope Works in Camden. Dan. Jeff Sparagata, who is a retired superintendent from Pottstown School District. And Ron Whitaker, who is Assistant Professor of Education at Green University and the Co-Director of the Center for Urban Education, Equity, and Improvement. And we're blessed to have Dr. Ginsburg on the stage as well today. Our panelists are, yes, that's fine. Our panelists come with a wide variety of expertise, both in academia, medicine, community partnership, and also from urban and suburban perspectives. And so, again, each person give us a 2-minute thought on what you heard today in the keynote that really struck your heart, your mind this afternoon. So, Rebecca, would you begin?
Does that work? Yes. Okay. So, hi, I'm Rebecca Bryan. I'm a nurse practitioner. 5 years ago, I left practice and teaching to begin the Wellness Center at Urban Promise Ministries in Camden, New Jersey. Urban Promise has been around for 30 years serving the youth of Camden. And the mission of the Wellness Center when I came was to reduce the impact of toxic stress on our Urban Promise community. I found that we had a community of incredibly wise youth. And so that's the first thing that resonated with me with Dr. Ginsburg's talk. I grew up in suburbia myself, and I was immediately struck by the spoken word that our children write, their ability to feel deeply compassionate and to kind of roll with grief, even as I see them suffer from it. But I also saw really challenging behaviors. I also found that I was working in a community that was incredibly resilient. We have experiential learning, and so a lot of times kids may struggle with traditional academic settings, but when you get them in the boat shop and you have them build beautiful boats, and then you hire them as river guides and they give tours, and when you see a beautiful side of Camden, it builds confidence and confidence, and it makes them feel like they're contributing, and that gives them a sense of control. And then some of the initiatives we have instituted, we have a large garden with farm-to-table cooking, and I think as a geeky nurse that we're reducing the inflammation by them eating healthy food. And we are integrating mindfulness practice into all of our classrooms because I think that teaches a sense of your body and your emotions, and it empowers children with the ability to self-regulate. Our staff have gradually become trauma-informed so that they are hopefully at this point all asking what happened to you instead of what's wrong with you. And I'm also a proud member of the Healing 10 Coalition in Camden, and we recently had a presentation on trauma-informed consequences, which is another thing that really resonated with me. Because if you want kids to succeed outside of Urban Promise, we need to hold them accountable to what our expectations are. But we do that in loving community. And I think the secret sauce behind Urban Promise is relationships. Trauma occurs in relationships, but healing can only occur in relationships. And so really I feel like what I've done is given language to so much of what Urban Promise already does, and we empower our youth with the tools that they need to succeed.
Thank you, Rebecca. Jeff?
Am I on? Yes. Thank you. Very pleased to be here today. I am formerly the proud superintendent of Pottstown School District, and I'm honored to be here today with all of you to talk a little bit about the work that we've done in Pottstown and how it has evolved in becoming a trauma-informed community. Pottstown is a high-risk urban community of about 22,000 people with all the associated problems of poverty, violence, and chronic health issues. In fact, in 2014, the school district qualified by the federal guidelines for 100% free lunch. And in 2014, something else happened. Dr. Ginsburg had visited us probably 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and did a tremendous presentation on resilience to our secondary staff. And in 2014, at our peak annual meeting, which is our school readiness initiative, community-based, Sandy Bloom came in and introduced us to ACEs and adverse childhood experiences, how it affects the human brain, and specifically the child's developing brain. In 2015, we had Dr. Roy Wade, who came in and extended the information about the ACEs study, and at that point in time, it was our opinion as community leaders that we had to move forward and become trauma-informed, not only as a school system, but as a community at large. And in the fall of 2015, two of our teachers are here that have helped us with this work. Caitlin O'Brien and Sam Matlin are in the audience. Appreciate it if you guys put your hands up or stand up. They're here somewhere. I don't know where Sam is. She might have had to go. But needless to say, this work doesn't happen alone. And we have a number of people from the Scattergood Foundation and other partners who are helping us to support this work. But in 2015, my colleague Mary Reek and I launched the Pottstown Trauma-Informed Community Collaborative that's working together to build awareness, understanding in order to overcome the impact of trauma and adverse childhood experiences on our children and families. I encourage you to visit our website, www.pottstownmatters.org. In order to address increasing mental health issues and antisocial behaviors by children throughout our peak sites, our community school readiness sites, our school system and community, Peak and PSD launched a pilot in 2016 and a full implementation this past fall in pre-kindergarten through 9th grade of social emotional learning curriculum in the school system aligned to the PTIC objectives. So that's where we're heading. The one thing that I resonated with Dr. Ginsburg today is that when I was a principal, and I was a principal in 3 different schools in Pottstown during my 23 years, teachers came to me constantly and said, "What's the matter with Jeff? My God, he falls asleep, he doesn't eat, he never pays attention, he doesn't do his homework. What's the matter with him?" And I didn't have the answers. And then we've learned through this trauma-informed initiative, through Dr. Ginsburg and others' work, that I have the answers to say, we need to find out what happened to Jeff. And once we learn those things, we'll be able to move forward together and help him to be successful. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Whitaker.
Yes, I would like to build on that theme, and I think that Dr. Ginsburg, he gives us that key principle of trauma-informed practice where we have to shift the question from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. Unfortunately, I always like to incorporate history into my discourse. W.E.B. Du Bois is still relevant when he raised that question in 1903 in his classic book, Souls of Black Folk, when he raises the question, how does it feel to be a problem? And within our work at Cabrini University, specifically within the Center for Urban Education, Equity, and Improvement, also our new Center for Domestic Violence. Within my work as a professor, that's what we are really challenging. Really challenging students and future educators to stop problematizing students, stop problematizing individuals and communities. Specifically is what Dr. Ginsburg said. We have to stop asking black men, how does it feel to be a problem? We have to stop asking gay people, how does it feel to be a problem? We have to stop asking Latino women, how does it feel to be a problem? And then we have to start to problematize these conditions within society, which are historic, that does not allow individuals to be human. Essentially, that's what Dr. Ginsburg was talking about. He's talking about that humanity that is essential for all of us. The second piece, I know we're short on time, is that if we really care about the community that Dr. Ginsburg, which he talked about, then we have to start doing true social justice work, right? Raise your hand if you heard social justice, okay? It's like the soup of the day, right? Hey, we're doing social justice work. But sadly, what I found is that, is this a checkoff, right? Or is this something cute that we're putting on our websites? True social justice work, and I'm going to end it right here, is what I find in the historical text of Ezekiel 22, when the main protagonist of that text challenges us to stand in the gap. It's also found in Galatians 6, and I know I'm safe to say this because I'm at Gesu, when, we're challenged to bear ye one another's burdens. That's the work that we're called to do, and that's the challenge that Dr. Ginsburg gave us today. Thank you.
So it's always hard to follow up anyone on this panel. So all I can offer is my one piece of advice. Homeworks in 2012 went through this process of transforming ourselves from a very traditional youth development outcome to a trauma-informed outcome. And there's lots that we can learn from that, but I think the most important thing that I can offer is this, and it's one thing I haven't heard today, is to help your organization become trauma-informed, you have to realize two things. The first is the young people who've experienced trauma, as it turns out, aren't the only ones with amygdalas, even if we talk about them like they are. As it turns out, the young people with ACE scores aren't the only ones with ACE scores, even though we talk about them like they are. When a young person stands in front of you and talks about how excited they are, talks about how proud they are, and we all clap. But when that same young person stands in front of you and says, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm depressed, and by the way, often they have very good reasons to feel that way. And we say, I'm not qualified to talk to you. Go sit in a room with someone and talk to them until you either feel better or start lying more effectively. We send a clear message about which emotions are okay and which emotions are dirty, shameful, and should not be shared. When we as staff sit around in a circle and share that we are excited and proud and happy, but when we're having a bad day and when we're angry and depressed and struggling, we keep our mouths shut and pretend that that doesn't happen to us. We send a clear message to our young people that only you young people have bad days. Only you young people have amygdalas. Only you young people have ACE scores, when in fact, that's a lie. I was a math teacher for a long time, and I can tell you the best way to teach a young person how to solve a math problem is to do it with them, is to show them how you solved it, to show them how you figured it out. And yet, all too often, when we try to show young people how to deal with those negative moments, we try to show young people how to deal with negative emotions, we act like it's something we've never experienced ourselves. And that's the one piece of advice that I can offer that can really transform an organization.
Thank you, Dan. My first question is directed to Rebecca. Your background as a nurse. The question is, what role does nutrition play in our students' lives in trauma? Nutrition.
Okay, that's why I pay a stipend to a dietitian, but, you are what you eat. right? I mean, we actually know that the bacteria in our gut makes the serotonin in our brain that makes us feel happy. It can help us to focus. It impacts our mood. I don't know how many of you all get hangry. Do you? Right? Well, we've had situations where when we first started serving breakfast 3 years ago, no lie, one of our staff said, "Kids, breakfast," and only a couple kids ran forward. And she goes, "Kids, there's food," and they all came running. Some of them didn't know breakfast. So when it comes to nutrition, I'm also very much an everything in moderation kind of person. I am trying to keep the soda away, and I'm trying to minimize the sugar and all that, but we also have donors who bring fun things. But the truth is, I just want kids to get food regularly and consistently so that they can hold their heads up. And now that we have a food program in place, we've seen a huge difference.
Ginsburg, a follow-up on that? Nutrition?
The only thing that I would add is that we know that kids in marginalized and oppressed environments learn best on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays. Did you hear that? Just went on. Kids learn best on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays because on Mondays they haven't had enough nutrition over the weekend. So we need to refeed them, and then on Fridays they begin getting anxious again about things that are going to be difficult. So to the extent that anybody in politics, as we're taking down all the protections we have set for people, tells you, really, why don't they just eat at home? We've got to fight this one in a big way.
Thank you. Dr. Sparagano, a question for you. What led you to begin trauma-informed education in Pottstown, and what do you see were the challenges to it?
Well, for me personally, it was listening to Dr. Ginsburg, and then consecutive years, Sandy Bloom and Roy Wade, talking about the impact of trauma on brain development in children, on the developing brain. We're seeing antisocial behavior in our classrooms, we're seeing in our child care sites. I don't know if you're aware of this, but 10% of children in child care sites across this country are expelled. 10%. Can you imagine that? 3- and 4-year-olds, they're sent home because whoever is responsible for that aspect of their education is not able to manage and help them to manage their behavior. So learning about those things and seeing those things happening in our own schools pushed us toward this area. Learning about ACEs, understanding what the impact is on the brain, and a decision that we made to support our children in learning to self-regulate their behavior. And we are not at the top of the mountain, but I'll tell you what, there's a movement in Pottstown right now as it relates to trauma-informed practices, awareness in the community. We have children in every classroom learning SEL strategies from pre-kindergarten through grade 9. And in 14 years' time, those pre-K children are going to be able to demonstrate empathy and compassion and self-regulate and know when to belly breathe. And they're going to have coping mechanisms to support them in their adolescence and adulthood.
Thank you. Dan, question for you. How do we involve parents, family members, and community in the process of recognizing and building strengths of our young people who've encountered traumatic histories?
There's a lot of complexity to it, but I think the easiest way is show them. When the neat thing about a trauma-informed approach is it works. And the moment that your young person who's been struggling in school, your young person who hasn't been able to hold a job, starts having that success, starts understanding what's happened to them and how they can do something about it. Parent engagement of community members isn't really a problem. Probably the most recent example from Hopeworks history is one thing that if you read in the papers about Camden is, oh, these companies are moving into Camden, they won't hire Camden residents, right? Turns out we've had 3 companies that have come to us asking for our youth to fill the jobs. Not in technology. They're asking our youth to fill their jobs in other fields because they have seen that our youth are able to successfully do it because they can manage their emotions, because they can understand what happened to them, and they've healed from what's happened. And so I think that's the most powerful way. The most powerful engagement strategy is showing that it works.
Thank you. Dr. Whitaker. just spoke recently at another event about self-care. How do we as educators provide self-care, especially dealing with children who have been traumatized?
Wow, that's a great question. I think one of the pieces that's tied to that is that we have to create safe places. And that takes work because really we have to build community. The point is that, and again, Dr. Ginsburg, I'm just going back to what he said, it's about caring for folk authentically. So within our classrooms, within our schools, how are we building relationships with our students? How are we building relationships with the parents and the communities? That's important work, and sadly, not too many schools, not too many educators are really being intentional about that work. So really, I'm just going back to what Dr. Ginsburg said. It's simple, but do we really care for the students? Do we really care for the parents and for the guardians? And do we really care for the community? And if we can truly say yes, then we can create those safe places where self-care can be facilitated.
What if I look at it?
Just one quick, very practical thing is one way we talk about how self-care at Hope works is it's an emotional muscle, right? When you are using your emotions every day, your emotions get tired, right? Just like a muscle gets tired if you're lifting bricks all day. When you're on the field playing football, your muscles get tired. And the thing about self-care is often we say, you teachers or you staff, you need to practice self-care. When a football player is on the field, there's two ways he can practice self-care. He can ask for a timeout, or the coach can see that he's not performing and the coach can pull him. Right? Self-care is not something an individual or organization does by themselves. It's a team effort where you're resting the emotional muscles. If you tell an individual staff member or a team member, you need to practice more self-care, you as an organization are doing it wrong. Self-care is an organizational team effort, just like when you're playing on the field. And that's something I think sometimes folks forget.
Let's stay with the same theme. So, Rebecca, you want to offer some thoughts on self-care to those involved today in the audience?
Sure. So another thing that Dan likes to say a lot that I think comes from sanctuary model is the idea that when we work with kids with a lot of trauma, it's kind of like a nuclear reactor, and it's vicarious. And that's all from the fact that we all have these mirror neurons in our heads. And that's what enables us to have empathy. But one of the interesting things is empathy is actually something that can help you with self-care if it's a healthy level of empathy. Because just as we can have compassion fatigue, we can also have compassion satisfaction. And so if we have a sense of purpose in the work that we do, and we keep healthy boundaries, that can be helpful. The second thing is to be emotionally intelligent. If you haven't read the book Emotional Intelligence 2.0, I highly recommend you do so. There are 4 areas of emotional intelligence: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. It's hugely empowering. You get to know yourself. You get to know when you've hit your limit. And the third thing is, just as we're teaching kids mindfulness, our practicing mindfulness ourselves creates a container in which we can function optimally. And so I strongly recommend it.
Jeff, as a superintendent and one of the responsible for a staff and principals and teachers, your thoughts on self-care?
Well, one thing that we recognized when we decided to become a trauma-informed community and school system and also implement social-emotional learning is that it was very important that the first thing that we did was take a look at our staff, provide training so that they could look at themselves and see where they're at on the continuum and how comfortable they are with where we're going to head in regards to teaching children about self-regulating their behavior. One thing that we all as parents, or many of us as parents, have taught our children, and many of us learned at home or at church or from coaches, is procedural self-talk and positive self-talk. And those are self-care mechanisms, in our opinion, that go a long way to keeping the lid on emotions when things potentially could go awry. Talk yourself procedurally through something. Positive self-talk. How many people learn that at home? How many people learned it in church? At school? Procedural self-talk. If you haven't learned it yet, it's time. If you don't know about positive self-talk and procedural self-talk, it's something, Google it. Because it's a mechanism, it's a protective factor.
This is a Dr. Ginsburg question, specifically. What about the kids that believe real tigers, underlined, are paper tigers? It makes sense to me that sometimes we need to protect them and be vigilant. What about the kids who do not recognize the real danger of their decisions?
So, is this on? The first thing that I would want to do is really actually sit down with those kids, because while there are rare kids who are truly impulsive, that's rare, and they tend to carry out impulsivity into adulthood. We actually overestimate in adolescence kids who think like that. We have this mythology about adolescents that they think they're invulnerable or that they think they're invincible, and we make assumptions that they don't want to hear adult wisdom. It is an authentic myth that kids think they're invulnerable. Sometimes they behave as if they're invulnerable. Sometimes they behave as if they don't care. That is more often than not a front for the truth, which is that they care so much it hurts. So before we make the assumption that a kid doesn't really care, I want to create an opportunity for that kid to begin telling us the truth. And in the vast majority of cases, it's that they actually care so much it hurts, but have a lot of investment in pretending they don't, because they don't have the experience that says an adult can help them problem solve. So while I accept in rare cases those kids exist, I'll tell you in the vast majority of cases, we need to back up and create safe spaces for them to understand we can guide them in a calm way to problem solve. Once kids gain that sense of control, a whole bunch of kids who look like they're tough become doll babies.
It's a general question for anybody on the panel. Take a stab at this one. Question is, how do I balance being sensitive and empathetic, but at the same time holding my students to high expectations and high discipline? Tim.
You're asking the wrong question. The two are not on opposite sides of the coin. And in fact, and I think, Doctor, if you are asking that question, spend some time thinking about what you're saying, right? What you're saying is that by acknowledging a young person's emotions, helping them cope with emotions, somehow they can't achieve at a high level somehow I can't hold them accountable. When in fact, in our experience, right, that is what allows them to hit the target. That is what allows them to, that's why folks want to hire HopeWorks youth. Not because they need 20 chances, they don't need a second chance, they do the job, and the reason is because they've got the emotional thing. So it's a common misperception that a youth who've experienced trauma can't have accountability, when in fact they're begging for that, and it really, the trauma-informed approach allows you to hold them accountable.
Yeah, I also would like to add this. I would just challenge that individual to really equip themselves with scholarship. So for example, Stereotype Threat, if you're not familiar with Dr. Claude Still's work, I would say you have to read that because he talks about high expectation, the importance of high expectation for all students within Stereotype Threat. I would also point that individual to a report from APA, the American Psychological Association, where they talk about the top 20 principles of psychology and how that's linked to teaching and learning. And the need for high expectations for all students is critically important. And it's one of the things that they highlight. So, as my colleague said, when we are showing students that I care that much about you, that I'm not going to accept anything less than excellent, guess what? They jump up to that. That's what the scholarship suggests. So I would also say Claude Still's work around Stereotype Threat and also the APA work.
General question for the panel as well. Students of color also experience trauma in predominantly white schools, white spaces. How do you expect we respond to this and begin to talk about this with openness and empathy? Students of color experience trauma oftentimes in predominantly white schools and spaces. How do we begin to discuss this in an intelligent and engaging way?
to staff. I'm thinking honestly, mostly, I live in a town that's predominantly white, and I mentor a young man across the street who's a person of color. And I think it's allowing a safe space. So it always comes back to safety, but it's allowing a space to honor and acknowledge the feelings that the person has, and recognizing that it is a challenge, and just, again, providing that space for authenticity, and that there should be no shame in the way that it's felt, and to have an area to express it.
Others?
Yeah, I guess I'll just jump in, and I want to contextualize it to Cabrini University. One of the things that I think is important is we're not putting that work solely on the students, right? So at Cabrini, one of the things, and I'm just being honest, as faculty, as staff, as administrators, we are having those tough conversations, those courageous conversations about microaggressions and the ways that we are committing this in the classroom. We are talking about our own biases. This is work that we have to be committed to. It's work that we're saying at Cabrini that we're going to continue to wrestle with this. We're going to have these tough conversations. We're going to, really do some internal reflecting. So that's work that we're doing as staff, faculty, and administrators. Now for students, we're also thinking of programs and initiatives where we can help them to feel at home within these institutions. So one of the programs that we're developing is for the Black males at Cabrini University, where we're going to be talking about racial socialization. We're going to be talking about the need for community and just what support looks like. And again, we're not doing a top-down approach, but we're including their voices in the conversation.
Just real quick, the only thing I would add to just emphasize, it is not the young people's job to tell you what you don't know. That is the job of the power structure, that is the job of the institution, to understand that this is happening, understand that it's real, and it is not the job of the young people to teach you what you don't know. That is the institution's job to do that work. The young people can partner with you and help you. It's not their job.
It's about creating a culture of equity for everyone. We talk about school funding. What do we say about school funding? Adequate, equitable, fair. It's the same thing with how you treat people. The golden rule isn't dead. And there's the expectation that whomever is responsible for articulating the vision of an institution is very clear on that.
I think there's something very, very powerful about reaching across boundaries. I did a study in the city of Philadelphia a couple decades ago where we were looking at what made people feel safe in a healthcare setting. And what comes up is judgment. When you dive deeper into judgment, what comes up is racism and homophobia. When you ask the kids what's going to make you feel better, our fantasy is that what they were going to say is that, the African Americans are going to say, I want to see an African American doctor. The gay kids are going to say they want to see a gay doctor. That is not what a single kid in the city of Philadelphia said. Here's what they said. I want to go to a place where there's all sorts of different people, up front and in back. Up front meaning the registrar level people, in back meaning the caregivers. I want to go to a place where there's all sorts of different people, up front and back, and I want to see that they get along. What kids call for is diversity, shared power, and respect. That's what they call for. So each of us has a role, crossing boundaries, whether it's black to white, white to black, whatever it is, can be very powerful when we share power and have authentic diversity.
This question is it's arrived. We often struggle to gain parental support for counseling services with our students. How do we move past the stigma of counseling? Open question.
Can I just add, Hope Works, that's very real, and it's not just parents, right? So, for example, none of my male friends go to counseling. They sure have life coaches, though, right? And all too often what we do is we talk about our parents or our thing, there's a stigma all over the place. And again, the key is demonstrate effectiveness. This is awesome stuff, right? This is really powerful stuff. You don't have to sell them on counseling. You have to sell them on, like, this is a transformative thing that's awesome. And then call it whatever you want.
Comments from the council?
All right, I'll jump back in. I like what Dan said when he said that anyone would say, I'm not qualified to talk to you, so go and talk to the therapist. I think a part of helping our staff to become trauma-informed is to realize that something that Dr. Felitti says, which is that actively listening and affirming is an active form of doing. And so it's incredibly powerful to hear someone's story and to affirm them in it. And a lot of times, you don't necessarily need full-out therapy, but if you do, then I agree. And we have a full-time therapist on staff, but she does a lot of things in the classroom relationally. She just went on a great trip to Assateague with the 9th graders, and the whole time she's really doing therapy, but the kids don't know it, you know. And so I think it's all how you approach it.
I think that the title of the day really begins with the explanation, and I want to echo what you guys said. So when we use the language of you need help, we are saying because you are broken. When we use the language of, my God, you're amazing, I want to see you rise to be your best self, and I'd love you to work with someone to think about how to get there, it feels very, very different. When we send to a counselor and we imply that that person is going to fix or solve your problems, we are sending with this slip that says, because you are broken. When we send to a counselor and say, their job is to listen to you, figure out what your strengths are so that you can figure out how to grow, it feels more like that self-help coach kind of thing. And you gotta really believe that. I mean, I tell kids, if you go into a counselor and they begin solving your problems, walk out. You want to find someone who's going to start with what is good about you and teach you to solve your problems.
Any questions from the audience that have not been asked today that you feel just moved to bring to the panel?
This question is for Dr. Ginsburg. Do you see racism as a mental health disorder? And if so, those same behaviors that you talk about that get passed down from generation to generation from children who are abused, does that same racist behavior make changes to the brain and pass down through generations as well? Have there been any studies?
I can't comment on studies, and I'm not sure that I'm ready to say whether or not it is a mental disorder or not. I'm not sure I have the wisdom within me. What I will say is that it is a driving, toxic, poisonous force that destroys all of us. And that I have been talking about racism intensely for the last couple of decades. Because I think when we don't talk about it, we're not going to move forward. So here's what I think. When I'm speaking to an audience, this was the 1 hour version. But one of the first things I try to help people understand is when I'm beginning to talk about racism, if you are beginning to hear that what I am saying is what you feel, you're not going to listen to me. Because if I tell you what you think and feel, you will begin denying it. I am talking about institutional and structural racism. And when you understand that society has certain pathways that predestine and repeat cycles of oppression, I don't need to tell you more than the fact that the most predictive thing about your health is your zip code. I do not need to tell you more than the resource that you are most likely, that the thing that defines how many resources you are going to get in your education is directly related to how much money your parents have. I do not need to teach you more about the perpetuation of structural racism than those two facts. So what I try to do is shift the onus on the individual and allow them to look at society, which makes it a bit safer. The other thing, which we've already begun talking about, is that when we were talking about microaggressions and when we were talking about understanding your unconscious biases. If I word it as, what do you think? People are like, I'm not prejudiced, and then they'll follow up with, I see everyone equally. Don't get me started, all right? They'll do that. But you know, there's this amazing, and help me if someone of you can remember it, because I'm bad at names, but there's this amazing TED Talk on embracing and walking towards your unconscious biases. Right, anybody know which one I'm talking about? It's just you two walking towards your biases. It's an African-American woman who says, please don't pretend you don't have this. So is it a mental illness? I don't know. Does it get passed down epigenetically? I don't know. But I don't know how you get raised in a world where the messages of racism are everywhere in the media without having unconscious biases. So rather than deny it, embrace it and create an opportunity for you to make a decision as best you can based on whatever knowledge you believe you have, back up, change the demographic in front of you, and say, would I be doing the same thing? That's just a really good way of embracing the reality that we have. I can't answer your question specifically, but I hope that gets it part way. Okay? What? Vernock Myers. That's the talk that I'm talking about. Trust me, watch it. You'll be able to teach it to other people. It alleviates your guilt. It just says, here we are. This is our reality. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't noticed, there are forces that are dividing us now. Now's the time to be united in choosing to move forward.
Question?
Can you hear me? Oh, could you just talk about resilience and how that is a protective factor for youth, children, or individuals with trauma exposure? I guess I'm thinking I heard today a lot about being trauma informed, and I'm wondering what your understanding of being resilient informed as well to address trauma. Thank you.
If the panel member address that, respond to that.
So, resilience can be taught. I think that's really cool. There are a lot of studies out of Harvard on resilience, and you may be born with a natural predisposition to being more resilient or less resilient, but you can teach it and you can empower youth with it. And I love Dr. Ginsburg's 7 C's of resilience. I've been told it's rather boring to teach when I teach the staff, but I try not to use the actual 7 C's, but I use them to undergird every decision that we make. And so, you know, when I'm teaching mindfulness, we're teaching control, emotional regulation. When we have our students give back, which we do regularly by volunteering, that's contributing and they get positive feedback. When they build boats, they build competence, they feel confident. We teach them the coping mechanisms that are healthy instead of unhealthy, and the list goes on and on. But it's incredibly empowering, and I find that the whole community becomes more resilient because of it.
So there are a lot of people who teach resilience only in the context of how you think. And while I certainly, you know, I had to narrow down the message about resilience, so I had the how you think slide. I believe that those people who think that resilience is about teaching people how to think differently are really only capturing about 1/5 of resilience. Resilience is not just something you can teach, which I agree with every word you said. But the bottom line of resilience is that those kids who make it are those kids who have been surrounded by at least one adult, more is better, who hold them to high expectations, and who love them without condition. The power of human protection, and that was really what I was trying to get across more than anything, is the most important thing. So we build resilience when we make people feel safe, to know that they are regarded. And I think Dr. Whitaker really pointed that out as the essence as well of what resilience is. So we know factually that it is protective, and some of the research that I think that we're referencing is from Jack Shonkoff at Harvard. We don't know why adults are so protective. I gave you a theory, but we know factually that they are. And and that when you have that adult who is surrounding you, you can really withstand a lot. But what we mustn't ever do when we teach resilience is to believe that we can get to the point of invulnerability. Because then resilience becomes a label of what you don't have. And you're like, oh, you know what his problem is? He's not resilience. No. The best among us have our threshold. There's only so much a human being can tolerate. Let's remember that.
I'll be very quick, and the only other thing I'll add to that, and we talked a lot about it today, there is sometimes this predisposition. There's folks who have experienced trauma that have these behaviors, and then there's folks who are resilient. That's not it, right? And in fact, folks who have the symptoms of trauma, right, are highly adaptive behaviors if the danger is real. Right? And so the idea is that it depends on the circumstance, it depends on whether it's a paper or a real tiger, but it's not like there's folks that have trauma and folks that have resilience and you gotta have more of one or the other, right? It's, you know, it's more complicated than that, and I just always get weird, there's separate buckets.
I met one of my students from St. John Newman High School, and I taught there recently, and he said, Father Thorne, you always gave us homework. So we have a few minutes left before we conclude today. Would you all give us a 1-minute homework assignment? Now what? We've been here, it's experienced today, now what? Ron. 1 minute.
Probably do mine in 30 seconds. One is to look at these students in the back. Can we all see these students? Can we give them a round of applause? If we are really serious, here's the homework, here's not just homework, I think it's probably best for me to say the charge. If we are really serious about transforming inner city education, if we're really serious about this work, then our motives have to be pure. Too often, as educators within organizations, we don't have pure motives. If we're truly committed to this work, let our love for these students be pure, let our care for these students, let it be pure. Also, the second piece, and I said this earlier about social justice, let's not cheapen social justice work. It cannot just be a cute term that we say or that we put on our website. How are you defining social justice for yourself? For me, I have two definitions. If I can help someone as I pass along my way, then my living is not in vain. The second is from Dr. King, his work from Birmingham, and he says this: injustice anywhere is what? A threat to justice. We have to have our own definition for social justice, but then we also have to have our role models for social justice. You know, this work that I do is not about personal accolades, it's not about tenure. I'm a professor going through the tenure track. It's not about that. It is truly about helping the students, helping my parents, and really being in true partnership with the community. So, let our motives be pure. Thank you.
Thank you. The charge. Dan?
That's worth a round of applause, right? Mine is simpler, which is you're going to go home tonight, you're going to be reflecting about this great discussion, you're going to be reflecting about ACEs, you're going to be reflecting about trauma. Spend the first 10 minutes of reflection not thinking about the young people in front of you, but thinking about your own experience, your own humanity. And then on Monday, don't leave your humanity in the car. If you're kind of low and depressed because it's Monday, share that and let young people listen to that. And if they're kind of low or depressed because they had a rough weekend, let them share that and listen to them. That alone will be transformative. They may not remember exactly what you teach that day, or they may not cite it later, but I guarantee you they will remember that moment when their teacher was a human being. And that is going to really help all the lessons the rest of the year.
Well, I'm going to borrow from medicine. In medicine, we talk about using universal precautions, which is so that you wear gloves and protect yourself in all places. With trauma-informed care, you can practice universal precautions as well. And And I really love the idea that you don't have to be traumatized to benefit from this. So regardless of where you are or with whom you're interacting, keep in mind, instead of what's wrong with you, what happened to you. And then I like to ask a follow-up question is, and what got you through it? Because that's resilience. And whether you're actually asking that of the person or that's just going on in your head, practicing universal precautions in all settings is hugely productive. And the way you can be reflective is to practice mindfulness. So if you don't know what that is, look it up.
Thank you. Charles.
Quick, relationships make the world go round. So when you think about that, in order to have meaningful relationships with colleagues, with children, with students, parents, you've got to be in touch with where you are personally first. And therefore, self-help is necessary. I talked about positive self-talk and procedural self-talk. Two very positive coping mechanisms. Talk yourself through a task and remind yourself that you can get it done. I think we've all learned that along the way. Sometimes we forget about it, but they're critical components to success in this life.
Round of applause for our panelists today. I want to remind everyone that Dr. Ginsburg's book, Building Resilience in Children and Teens, available in the hallways you leave, and we'll give Dr. Ginsburg the last word on the charge. But you want to give us 1 minute on what's now.
So, homework assignment. Reframe your expectations of teenagers. As long as we roll our eyes when we think about our 11-year-olds becoming adolescents, as long as we cross the street when we see a young black man, we will never prepare our teenagers to take over our world. What we can do without a shadow of a doubt as a city is reframe our teenagers and see in them hope and possibility. Adolescents are the people who have not yet learned to avert their eyes from injustice. Adolescents are the people who see a person who is homeless and do not walk past them and wonder why. The righteous indignation of adolescence is what we rely on to move forward as a society, and rather than shutting them down and holding them to low expectation, let's think as the city of Philadelphia how to reframe our expectation of teenagers and expecting each of them the answers so that they will ultimately take care of us.
Thank you so much.